90.7 KPFK, Los Angeles.
Russia, if you're listening.
Talk show, random, political, outrageous, philosophical, analytical, passionate, hidden sunsets, roadkill cooking tips, open-minded, swordsman, bent, resolute, chocolate, bushwhacker, belt buckles, investigative, companion, fearless. Call in, piercing the cloud of mainstream entertainment. It's the Cary Harrison Files.
And it is the Cary Harrison Files. Welcome, welcome. Well, we're going to have some lessons in resistance today because apparently people seem to think something is different in the government after just a month or so. And maybe they're onto something. We're going to find out. We're also live streaming right now on YouTube. You can simply Google Cary Harrison YouTube and subscribe so we can stay connected. When you show up at your destination, then simply switch over to the stream on your phone at the Cary Harrison YouTube channel, which you can go to easily at kpfk.net. Just go to kpfk.net. Coming up, we're going to go to former NFL Minnesota Vikings player Chris Cluey, who was fired from his job as a high school football coach following his MAGA protest and arrest at a Southern California City Council meeting recently. Well, we're going to look at the growing power of governments, and that's coming up at the bottom of the hour. But for now, you weary, bewildered passengers on this rickety train we call history, well, you're in for a treat. If you thought progress was a straight line, that justice was inevitable, or that voting rights were secured with a neat little bow back in 1965, then I regret to inform you that avoiding the news cycle nowadays is bad for your health. You see, the past is not done with us. And lucky for us, some of its veterans are still here to remind us what unfinished business does look like. Our next guest, who through no choice of her own was drafted into the grand, brutal theater of the civil rights movement, born into it, really. Her father, Reverend Hosea Williams, was one of Dr. King's most trusted firebrands, a man who collected more arrests than most people collect paychecks. He led the march on Bloody Sunday, where he and John Lewis got a fiery welcome from the Alabama state troopers in the form of billy clubs and tear gas. And now, all these years later, his daughter, battle-tested, unshaken, is leading the 60th anniversary of the SCOPE Project, King's 1965 Voting Rights Initiative. For those of you streaming or on YouTube, this was the project that sent bright-eyed, white Northern college students into the Deep South to register Black voters, many of whom learned the hard way that democracy was less of a right and more of an unfortunate contact sport. Yet almost 50,000 new voters got on the rolls that summer. And if you think the work is done, ask the people still fighting to keep their ballots from vanishing into thin air today. With us right now is Dr. Barbara Williams Emerson, who has spent her life at the crossroads of activism and education, poking and prodding institutions to actually live up to their grand mission statements. She's been in the trenches of voter rights, affirmative action, and higher education, proving that, unlike some, she doesn't suffer from the American affliction of amnesia. She's also just penned an essay about the other guy on the famous Edmund Pettus Bridge, because as it turns out, history isn't just the names carved into the monuments, but the foot soldiers who did the marching, did the bleeding, did the dying. Let's go to her live these 60 years later in Selma, Alabama. Dr. Emerson, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Well, good afternoon to you too, and good morning for those of us on the West Coast. And in Hawaii, have your first coffee. You were practically born into the movement. There was there ever a moment you wished for a more normal childhood, or was activism just part of the family business?
Well, you're right. I was practically born into the movement. As a matter of fact, I was born on the day of the year that makes the statement. I was born on March 4th.
Well, your father, Reverend Hosea Williams, endured more than 125 arrests. Was there a time that you can remember when you feared he wouldn't come home?
Yes, many a nights, not just the arrest, but many a night when he was out late, we feared that he might not come home. He was arrested. We would actually like it when he got arrested, because we knew when he was in jail, he would get not arrest. Even though he was arrested, we would go, oh, he'll get some sleep. He'll stand still. He'll get some rest and we'll know where he is. So that wasn't as much of a problem as when he was out and about and being tailed by police and being harassed every night and being followed by police when he was out trying to do his work. So no, I
Let's
don't think that was the problem.
let's focus this on today because the anniversary of the Scope project is happening right now. You're right at ground zero of where it all happened some years ago, keeping this
Yes.
alive, keeping it in people's minds. But I bet you didn't imagine even 2 years ago it would actually have meaning once again, just as sharp for many.
Not the meaning that it has today. We're actually in Montgomery for the first 2 days, for today and tomorrow, and then on Saturday and Sunday, we will be in Selma for the bridge crossing on Sunday. But we have gathered in Montgomery on Thursday and Friday with the volunteers, veterans of the SCOPE project, the Summer Community Organization and Political Education Project that Hosea Williams headed at Dr. King's insistence in order to prepare people for the passage of the Voting Rights Act. You see, when Congress passed the act, or in anticipation of it, there was no assumption that because some people in Washington said, okay, now people, the right that you have been denied for all those years, we're going to say you are entitled to do it, that Black people who had been denied and oppressed and killed for, that people were just going to flood the polls. So the strategy was to prepare people, voter registration, political education, but when the manpower was needed. So a cadre of students from Northern College, predominantly white students who had the time and the energy, were brought to the South to assist local people who were ready to do the work, to go into these communities to prepare people for the passage of the Voting Rights Act. And that they did, and people were ready to go to the polls when their opportunity came. And those are the people that were having the 60th anniversary reunion in Montgomery, and we'll be going to Selma to commemorate Bloody Sunday.
Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files, reminding you can get our free newsletter at caryharrison.com. caryharrison.com. With that, you're going to get a transcript of the show. You're going to get clips. You're going to get archives, all the other cool stuff and things we simply cannot do on the radio. Right now, we're making relevant an anniversary that was just a footnote in history, a giant footnote in history that many people, I sound like you know who in the White House, most people, let's just say a lot of people, still sounding like him, literally don't know about anymore, especially if you're streaming, maybe you're in your 20s or 30s. It's simply not taught, especially with DEI. It is definitely not taught. As we talked to Dr. Barbara Williams Emerson, daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King's organizer. When she was 17, she was part of the group that encountered redneck cops and dogs and beatings in Selma, Alabama. And since then, she's devoted her life to voter rights, to affirmative action, and higher education. She's here today for younger listeners and viewers to see how history is repeating itself on this very anniversary and what you can do to stop from being erased by powers that now say you simply don't exist. If you check a box called Other, we're talking to you. And Dr. Emerson, DEI is code for Black people, for gays, for really anybody who isn't a white male Christian.
Exactly. So the point is organize, organize, organize. Because the people who were doing this work in SCOPE were young people. I was the youngest at 17, but most of the people who were in the project, none of them were older than 21. They organized, they joined forces with older people who were determined to make change. They provided the energy, they provided the legwork, and together they got things done. So don't sit back and say, oh, I wish I could, or if I were older, I would do something, or that the older people, the older generation should do something. No, honey, you should do something. You should organize. It's your turn, because the changes that the president is putting into place, you will be the one that will suffer from these changes in the long run. You will be the one that there will be no such thing as Social Security. You will be the one that when you need health care, there will be no health care for you. You are the one that the college education won't be there for. You will be the one whose high school education will be dummied down because there won't be enough teachers to go around, because this is going to come home and bite everybody in the butt locally. You will be the one who won't be able to get all of the nutrition that you need because the price on food, not just eggs, is going to go up exponentially. So young people will be suffering longer than anyone else. So it is your responsibility to organize and resist. Get off of the phone, use the phone to become a part of the resistance. I wish we had the media, the social media opportunity that you have today to organize. If you can use that phone to organize a party, to organize a trip, to organize your friends to get together. You can use that phone to organize a protest in your area. You can use that phone to organize a group of your friends to go down to your congressman's office and be there when he comes to town to try to get into his office and let him know there's a problem. Even if when I was out there organizing people to register to vote, I was not old enough to register to vote myself. But I knew that it was an important thing to do. So don't tell me about you too young, and you're not ready. This is your future that is at stake. So organize, organize, organize. Resist, resist, resist.
Quick question, Dr. Barbara Williams Emerson, and it's probably the obvious one. A lot of people are terrified. They have been threatened directly during the State of the Union address, basically on a daily basis. Even the media, of which I'm a participant of, though not this particular station or our network. The other ones, absolutely. Just be aware, watch out. You know, they're coming for you. Be small, be silent, behave, be polite, act like, Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi right now. Just be quiet and scowl, but stand in the corner and don't make a problem. That's not, what do we say to people who believe that, and maybe they are truly imperiled, but so were you, and it mattered?
Absolutely, we were imperiled. And a lot of people were scared that to go to vote, to go to register. And that is why Dr. King assigned Jose Williams to take these young people and go into the communities to work with the people who were not scared and convince the people who were afraid that this is the opportunity, this is the chance. So there's the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule. A third of the people are not going to be able to see the light. A third of the people will see the light. A third of the people will be in between. So the third of us who see the light must go and get the people who are in between and bring them into the light. And then we will have 2/3 of us who are seeing the light, and then we can move forward into the light.
We saw the same thing historically in Nazi Germany, which predated your movement by at least 20 years, 30 years. It was the same thing. It was a third of the really bottom of the pyramid that went for it because they didn't know any better. They were hungry. They didn't see much of a future. A guy came in and promised them free golf lessons and abundance and make Germany great again. Sounds good to me. So they said yes. And then the middle part sort of sat there and watched and said, well, let's just see let's give them a chance and let it play out. And the top third, of course, were going nuts because they knew it was all a canard and hocus pocus and nonsense and the death of everything that they knew. So it's the same setup today, stimulating people to get into action. That is another issue. You must have encountered obstacles in the way, even with your own. Let's talk a little bit about that so that we can help people understand, here's what it looks like when this happens. Here's what you can do about it.
Indeed, people were very much afraid because they had been beaten and threatened when they did try to go to register to vote. There was it was not illegal to register to vote before the passage of the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act did not grant the right to vote. What it did was to stop local communities from stopping people from exercising their right to vote. So people who previously had tried or knew of others who had tried to register to vote, they had to be convinced that now is the time. So it took people who had the courage to bring others along. And that takes a lot of convincing. And it takes a lot of courage for people who this has been to their peril before. So getting a backbone is not easy, but you don't get it unless somebody else brings you to it usually. So it's
Cary Harris with you. I'm
another.
so sorry. The internet signal is dropping in and out here. I'm just going to jump in and reintroduce you. People drive to get out of their cars. Hopefully they're smart. They're streaming. They're continuing on our YouTube channel. Just Google Cary Harris on YouTube or go to kpfk.net. We're talking to Dr. Barbara Williams Emerson, daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King's organizer. When she was 17, she was part of the group that encountered redneck cops and dogs and beatings in Selma, Alabama. And since then, she's devoted her life to voter rights, affirmative action, and higher education. She's here today for younger listeners and viewers to see how history is indeed repeating itself on this very anniversary and what you could do to stop from being erased by powers that say you no longer and simply do not exist. And Dr. Williams, if your father were alive today, what do you think he'd say about the state of civil rights in America?
Oh, if my father were alive today, he would be mounting a campaign, even if it was him. He always had a cadre of about 20 to 25 people that would go anywhere and do anything with him. He would be marching in the streets of Washington, D.C. They would be arrested. You talk about his, it probably would have had, his arrest would probably be up to 150 by now, because he would be marching on the White House. Marching White House every time Trump, he would probably, 25 cadre of people who would follow him, we would be marching every day, because every day the president is writing some new injustice. So there would be a bunch of signs against injustices every day. He would most definitely be enacting nonviolent direct action, pointing out the injustice that is being perpetrated on the American people every day, calling it
Dr. Emerson,
what he would be doing.
Your father was arrested 125 times that we know of, could have been more. How did he get out? Because after maybe unless you're the president with 34 felonies, which is
I
unusual
lost.
and a historical first. But your father having been arrested so many times, wouldn't they just say, well, he's a chronic criminal, let's just leave him locked up forever, yet he was released? What was the magic alchemy there?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of the question.
How did your father get out of jail after being arrested so many times when his rap sheet was a couple of miles long?
Because they were not felonies, they were misdemeanor crimes and things that were um, trumped up in order trumped up in order to keep out, so they were never substantial enough. He would have times maybe 30 days. For instance, he was in jail during the Reagan inauguration, but he was released from jail to go to the inauguration. Those were the times, for instance, like I said, that we would be glad to say, we would say, oh, he's in jail, he's going to get a rest. He needs a rest. He would go hard for so long sometimes that he would literally need to go on a wellness retreat, and jail would be his wellness retreat.
Well, this is in the time-honored tradition of Henry David Thoreau and other early folks in this country, your father included later on, Mahatma Gandhi, Dr. King. All of this thinking is uniquely American, and it's a really good opportunity to exercise this. Just a programming note, coming up in a few minutes, we're going to talk to NFL player Chris Kluwe of the Minnesota Vikings, who was arrested for standing up in front of city council and saying they ought to take down a MAGA plaque off of the public library, because the library is for the public, not just for one political sector. And a public library probably ought not be an advertising place for one political party. So he got arrested. We're going to talk to him about what that was like and what the lessons he has learned and what it's like to be brave in the midst of a tidal wave. We're talking to Dr. Barbara Williams Emerson, and we're getting some tips. Also, we've just gotten some comments on the YouTube portion. You can go to Cary Harrison YouTube, also kpfk.net. And some comments are like, you need to pump up the numbers on this video. People need to see it and share it. So please do that, because Dr. Emerson was there and speaks not theoretically, but from real life experience. Born into the movement, grew up in the movement, raised in the movement, and you stuck with the movement. That's a good question. Why would you stick with the movement when suddenly you had enough food, maybe a decent car, a nice place to live, and Netflix?
Because it became my career. I have a master's in community organization and planning from Columbia University, and I have a doctorate in administration, planning, and policy analysis. These are things that one can do and that will benefit movements. Movement is to bring about change. And that is what I chose as my career, to bring about change, institutional change. I used my setting primarily as higher education. But that is something that young people can realize, that to be an agent of change, you can do that in any setting, whether it is the health field or the educational field or the legal field or the computer field, because everywhere you go, there is some need for social justice, because there's nowhere in our society that we have reached equity, inclusion, and diversity. There is still a need. There is no field that I know of where those goals have been reached. And if there is not a formalized program in place, then it comes about by the people who are working in those fields to make it happen by the way that they practice policy in the way that they work. So that's what I did. I worked in the field of education, and in each position that I had, whether it was dean or vice president or provost, I worked towards having those as goals. And people say, well, how do you do that? How do you do it? Well, I maintain that you institutionalize and you reach diversity, equity, and inclusion goals the same way that you would reach any other kind of goal. When computers came into existence and technology became the goal of institutions, no one had ever done it before, but they figured out how to make that goal a reality because there was a commitment to do it.
It's
When the
interesting, Dr.
commitment
Barbara Williams Emerson,
Mhm.
when we look at the recent halftime at Super Bowl, that was a snapshot of what America really looks like, which was absolutely diverse, inclusive. In fact, my people were not represented there because there just ain't as many of my people as there are everybody else. And so halftime at Super Bowl is generally the right litmus paper to dip in the water of reality. And so if you want to know and remember who you are and where you stand, watch that kind of stuff because advertisers make money on who's really out there, and they're showing you who's really out there. Let's end Dr. Barbara Williams Emerson with the most absurd excuse you've heard from people who don't vote.
What is the most absurd excuse I've heard?
Yeah, when people
Is
say,
that
"Well, I
I
don't
don't.
vote. It doesn't matter. I'm busy."
Right. That's the most absurd excuse, is that it doesn't count. That it doesn't count. And my counter is, if it doesn't count, then why do people try so hard to keep you from voting if it doesn't matter?
Right. And
Why is the vote
politics
repressed?
continue. If you don't participate in politics, it participates in you. So you can opt out all you want, but it's just going to grow hair and teeth if there's no resistance. So I think the take home that we're learning from you is that unless you push back, it's only going to get stronger and eat more.
Exactly. Exactly. And the pendulum is going to swing. It's going to get better. And then as soon as it gets better, it's going to get worse again. So unless you resist when it gets worse, it's never going to get better. It's going to go back and forth. It's not a consistent forward movement so every time it gets bad, you have to resist the negativity in order to push it into the positive zone again. And each time it swings, it gets further in each direction. If you don't push back, it'll stay in the negative zone.
Well, I
So
want to
it's
thank you for coming on today. And if you can do this and you're still doing it and you love doing it, then it must be a good thing.
I'm 77 years old, so yes, I'm still doing it.
Okay. So if you're 27 or 17 and somebody who's 77 has got more fire and in their gut, in their belly, and is out there fighting for you while you're sitting on whatever you're doing, if you're not thinking about resistance and somebody 3 times your age is, then please let's rethink that. I want to thank you so much for coming on today, Dr. Barbara Williams Emerson. You're in Montgomery, Alabama today, or Selma?
In Montgomery today, we'll be going to Selma tomorrow morning.
And this is the anniversary. You are the daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King's organizer, Hosea Williams. When you were 17, You were part of the group that encountered redneck cops and dogs and beatings in Selma, Alabama. Since then, you've devoted your life to voter rights, affirmative action, higher education. Here today for our younger listeners and viewers to see how history is repeating itself on this very anniversary, and what any of us could do to stop being erased by powers that say we simply no longer exist. Thank you for joining us today on the Cary Harrison Files.
My pleasure, Cary.
And my hat's off to you. And when I'm 77, I hope I have that kind of animated spirit. But it seems like looking at the comments coming off of YouTube, I don't get to opt out, and therefore neither can you. Reminding you, we're also live streaming right now on that very YouTube. You can simply Google Cary Harrison YouTube and subscribe so we can stay connected when you show up at your destination. Simply switch over to the stream on your phone at the Cary Harrison YouTube channel, which you can also easily find at kpfk.net. That's kpfk.net. Coming up, we're going to be talking to a former NFL football player who stood up for his freedom of speech, stood up for people he had never even met by the tens of thousands, and was arrested for it. We're going to talk about what that looks like, lessons learned, and how to move forward as we continue here on the Cary Harrison Files.
Listen, well, it's still legal.
The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
Everybody wants cheap airfare, but where do you find it? You call low-cost airlines. They specialize in cheap flights, discount hotel rooms, cheap car rental rates, and with a best price guarantee. If you want the lowest prices on your airline tickets or other travel services, call now. That's right, call. That's the only way to get these rates. Experts are standing by 24/7 to get you the cheapest airfare and hotel rates available. So don't wait. Call now.
The following program is brought to you by Freedom of Speech, constitutionally reinforced, odor absorbent. It's the only amendment that keeps you feeling fresher, freer, and more feminine. Lemon-scented freedom of speech since 1787.